3, 2.
How many viewers do we get? That's really interesting, isn't it? Can't imagine. I haven't done this before. So thanks, everybody. We're going to go do some introductions in a minute, just to introduce myself, and then I'll introduce Tom. It's very exciting. I know many of you, but my name's Una Goldsworthy. I'm Chief Exec at Brunel Care. We're a housing association and a social care organisation who operate in the city. And I've been asked to co-chair alongside Tom, who I'm going to introduce now.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to see some new faces as well as ones that I know in other capacities. I'm Councillor Tom Reynolds, I'm the Councillor for Hawford Ward, and as of yesterday I'm also now the Cabinet Member for Housing Delivery in Homes. So bear with me while I do get to grips with everything. Yeah, it's lovely to see you all. And
Tom and I have agreed that we're not quite sure how we co-chair a meeting, so we're going to take it in turns a little bit. But I was very delighted because I think it was only yesterday, Tom, wasn't it? And so it looked as though I was not the co-chair, I was the only chair. And I'm absolutely delighted that Tom is able to do that. Tom actually has a lot more experience of this board than I do, so I'm very new to it, whereas Tom has sat on it before with other hats on. So he'll be much more efficient at this than me. And to those of you who are new, so there's a number of faces I can see who are newly joining us, welcome. We're going to explain a little bit about what we do, what we're aiming to do, and those of you who were on it before, welcome back. There has been a long hiatus. I think Tom was telling me the last meeting was October last year, probably. So there's been a long gap in that, but in some ways this feels like a launch. This is a relaunch, so actually it's quite exciting. We are expecting Marvin to come, but we'll just carry on. And Marvin really wanted to be here because he wanted to talk about his commitment to affordable homes and housing across the city. So if he joins us, we'll go back to that item. So I'm going to chair the first bit, and then Tom's going to take over for the second bit. And given that he knew about this yesterday, he's obviously rehearsed it hugely in advance. So what I want to do the first bit is, and it's really difficult when we're not in the same room, it's really hard, isn't it, when we're all remote like this, but we will be together at some point, is I'm going to just ask you to go around. I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'm going to go around and ask people to say who they are, and also just perhaps say a little bit about why you want to be on the Homes Board, what your particular interest is, and I'd like to hear what your offer might be. What Tom and I we caught up yesterday, and what we talked about is we don't want this board to be just I'm ticking a box and turning up. Really not in our interest to do that. We want it to be something a board that is able to do stuff, and that might mean actually we have a shorter agenda and we get fewer reports, but that we actually see this as something that between the meetings we go away and we get things done. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Now I'm going to go around, and you probably, I'm going to start with somebody who might have been on it before. Let me have a look. So let's start with, oh, I can't see. Who was on it? Put your hand up if you were on the board before. Laura? David? Oh, not many. And Penny. Right, let's start with Laura. Laura, tell us about yourself.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Laura Welty, the senior worker at Bristol Disability Equality Forum. I'm on the board for the knowledge and expertise I can bring around the needs of disabled people. We're regularly in contact with disabled people and getting feedback from them around a whole range of housing issues. I have that expertise to offer. I have a specific ask, however, and that is that accessibility is taken as a core part of any agenda item that we experience, whether that's rented accommodation, social housing, homelessness, or whatever, because those are often not met needs, and the city has an appallingly low level of accessible accommodation.
Thank you, Laura. And I've heard you speak before, and that's very true. Then let's go to David.
Hi, I'm David Ingerslev. I work for St Mungo's as the regional head for the Bristol area, and I'm also chair of the Bristol Supported Housing Forum. And the offer for this board is to bring and coordinate the work going on to tackle rough sleeping and homelessness across Bristol through the Homelessness Action Partnership, or whatever we design to replace that. What is needed is to sort of root all of that work that's going on in some good governance, so that we can describe, when we're doing things like bidding for funds to support people in Bristol, that we've got really strong approach to that partnership working. So that's the need from the board, and to have that rooted in an agenda that belongs to the whole city rather than to the council or any one partner. But I think there's a lot coming in terms of funding from the MHCLG, and we're hoping that will settle in the next financial year into slightly longer term arrangements than year by year that we've had for the past number of years. But Bristol's been very successful in securing that funding to help our people who need it most.
Thanks, David. And actually credit to David and St Mungo's and others, because this has been one horrendous year and you've done a huge amount of good work together. We've actually got Paul Sylvester coming along for one of the first items, and we decided to do that because we really wanted to update people about the homelessness situation and some of the amazing work that's been going on as a real priority. So thanks, David. Right, and I think I've got Penny next.
Thank you. So hello, everybody. My name's Penny Wolster. I'm the hub manager for shelters services here in Bristol. I'm sitting on the board representing the advice centres for Avon network. So this is a network of advice centres, including the CAB, St Paul's Advice, Talking Money, and local advice centres across Bristol and the surrounding area. Our offer to the board as a network of advice agencies is similar to what David is describing in terms of the Bristol Supported Housing Forum, but also we want to be able to use our expertise as advisors to actually work with the council and others across the city in particular to look at systems change so that people aren't actually falling into housing emergency situations in the first place. We hold a lot of knowledge and information across the different advice agencies, whether it's the specialisms like shelter in housing and homelessness, or whether it's our colleagues in Talking Money looking particularly at debt and welfare benefits and things like that. So I think that's the offer we have. The ask that we have from the board is when considering where we want to put resources in the city, we do need to remember the advice sector as well as the support and welfare provision that the council considers as well.
Thanks, Penny. Really important work as well that you're doing. So then shall I go around the screen? So I think I've exhausted the previous. Oh no, Steve, Steve BCLT, were you a previous member?
Wasn't. This is my first meeting.
Oh well, let's start with you then. We'll do. Oh, and Catherine. We'll come to you in a minute, Catherine. Steve.
Okay, thanks, Una. So I'm Steve Dale, and I'm the chief exec at Bristol Community Land Trust. We are the hosts of Community-Led Homes West of England, which is the community-led housing enabling hub for this region. Personally, I've got 20 years plus kind of working in the voluntary community and higher education sectors, but I'm quite new to housing, so I've been in post for about 8 months now. And why are we here? We're here because we are, as BCLT, we develop affordable housing, affordable and sustainable homes, and through Community-Led Homes West, we also support other community groups, providing them the advice and support they need to be able to design and develop homes that meet their specific needs, you know, whether that's a community of interest or a geographical community around the west of England, you know, rural, urban, Everyone has different needs, and some of those particular needs have been, already highlighted through the other contributors today. So that's why we're here, to bring community-led housing into the mix, but very specifically what we want to do over the next kind of 3 or 4 months is to build a 10-year strategy for community-led housing in the west of England, and we want to be able to do that with and through this board and with your support.
Thanks, Stephen. I think you've got some schemes underway as well at the moment, haven't you, so that you're involved in?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've got big development with Brighter Places in Lockleys, 50 home development, and then we have our 12 home development on the corner of Eastfield Park in Bristol as well. Thanks, Una.
Thanks, Steve. Right, Katherine, sorry, I ignored you.
That's all right. Hello, everybody. I'm Katherine Penton, and I'm a development director with Vistry Partnerships, which is a sort of hybrid contractor developer who build homes for housing associations, local authorities, as well as homes for sale. I'm here on the board because I'm also a non-exec director of Elam Housing Association. Before I worked for Vistry, I worked for 13 years for Live West, who some of you will know, the housing association. So I'm here because I have a lot of experience and as well as genuine commitment to working in partnership and building homes across all tenures. And I think the offer to the board is that I can bring that kind of the balance you need between passion and ideology, and then the reality of delivery from a development perspective. And then also to help the board with kind of the direction that the sector is going in terms of technology and carbon neutral or carbon reduction strategies, and how that will roll out in kind of a bigger scale for mainstream housing. And genuinely, I think the main thing is that I believe we all need each other to deliver a step change in housing delivery. So that partnership perspective and experience hopefully will be helpful.
Thank you, Katherine. I'm now going to go on my screen, so it won't be on your screen, so it might not seem logical, but it's logical to me. So, Dee, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I'm Deanne Klein. I'm the Bristol Homes and Communities Board support lead for Bristol City Council, and I obviously support the facilitation of the board and support all members within the board with regards to our core themes and priorities. And my day job is Policy and Practice Manager for Housing and Landlord Services. Thank you.
Thanks, Dee. We might need a bit of that. Might need support on that. Thanks. My next one is Gavin. And welcome, Gavin. This is your first meeting. You're on mute. Gavin, can you hear? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. First day at school, Luna. Sorry, miss.
Oh, what can you do?
Yeah, so my name is Gavin Bridge. My business is Spacia, which I launched at the beginning of this year. Property development business. People might know me more from my previous business, Cubex. Probably the scheme most known in Bristol is the Finsbury development. I'm bringing forward the originator of the Froome Gateway project in St Jude's, but also looking as well as regeneration projects, sustainable office development, and Liberal Regional Chair of Land Aid in the South West, which is the Property Institute charity around youth homelessness. And I have a grant title of Strategic Advisor to Bristol and Bath Regional Capital, whatever a Strategic Advisor is. I think it's kind of just running around doing things for Ed, I think. Why I'm interested in this, I could bring accelerating delivery of homes, I think, of all types. Funding, bringing new types of funding.
Gavin, your signal's coming in and out. I think your internet's a bit wobbly.
So I finished, Una.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. It was a bit wobbly. So if you've got a problem with your, just put your camera off. Thanks, Gavin. And then I've got Elaine.
Hi, I'm Elaine Alford. I'm Head of Housing Delivery at Bristol City Council. So I'll be working very closely with Councillor Reynolds going forward. I've got 20 years experience, 20 years plus experience in lots of different aspects of housing delivery. I'm an architect by profession. I've worked in small practices, consultancy. I've come from a national house builder background as well. And that's what I can offer. I can offer that experience, understanding delivery routes and mechanisms, understanding the commerciality associated with delivery of housing, and I'm really focused, to be fair, on delivery. So yeah, that's what I can bring.
Thanks, Elaine. Really good that you're joining us. Thank you. And then I've got Alan.
Hi everyone, my name is Alan Macleod with the City Office. So I'm going to be supporting the Homes Board from a City Office perspective, and in terms of what I can offer, I suppose it's about linking to the other boards and the other groups that the City Office has, the different advisory forums and the different boards that we work with and we support across the city. So that's the main thing from me.
Thanks, Alan. And I think when Marvin joins us, he'll be able to say how this fits within the context of the whole One City plan. Thank you. I've just had apologies from Marvin and then unapologies. Now he is coming, so which is good. David Barclay, that is.
Hi everyone, my name is David Barclay. I'm also part of the City Office team. My focus within that team is particularly on issues around migrant inclusion. And so I'm here to be part of the conversation to observe about one of the priority targets for this year.
Thanks, David. Vicky.
Hi, I'm Vicky Parker. I'm the Lettings Manager at Curo. So I guess experience for me is I've been in Lettings for years now. But previous to that, my experience is DV, safeguarding and antisocial behaviour with South Wales Council, Bristol City Council and the police as well, even in Somerset. So maybe a little mix of knowledge there. For me, being on this board, our Bristol stock is relatively small to some providers. However, we're growing all the time in Bristol, so really good to have those connections as well. And also I'm the co-chair of the West of England Partnership meeting with Lizzie, so it'd be really good to see these two meetings crossing over with each other and being able to feed into each other as well.
Thanks, Vicky. So that's linked to the Bristol Housing Partnership as well, isn't it? I think. Thank you. Helen D.
Hi, so I'm Helen Denyer. I'm the Service Director for St Mungo's for South West England, which includes Bristol. But the reason that I'm here today is as a guest, because St Mungo's has a secretariat function on the Kerslake Commission. So that's why I'm here today.
Well, maybe you could tell us a bit about that later, the Kerslake. That sounds very interesting. Yes, good. Thank you. And then Helen B.
Thanks, Una. Hi, everybody. My name is Helen Bone and I work for Homes England. Homes England is a government agency, national agency, tasked with accelerating the delivery of housing, particularly in areas of high affordability pressure. I think what we can offer, and thank you very much for inviting us to be part of the board, is access to funding and finance, access to expertise around housing delivery. We do own land in Bristol too, so working collaboratively on our land opportunities. I actually sit within the affordable housing team, so some of the conversations already that St Mungo's have mentioned and Bristol CLT are funds that fall within the affordable homes programme, so I can offer links into other parts of the agency where needed. And then more personally, I've worked in Bristol for over 20 years, both in the inner city and across most of the council estates, and so hope I can bring that local knowledge and understanding and expertise of what the needs are in those communities. Really looking forward to working with you all.
Thanks, Helen. And I will say I've worked with Helen for many years and she knows Bristol extremely well. And it's really good to have that link into Homes England at that more strategic level as well. Thank you. Marvin, welcome. I'm going to introduce you in a minute, if that's okay, because I'll just finish these introductions and then we'll come back to you. but thanks for joining us. Liz, you're next.
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm the Policy and Public Affairs Manager at St Mungo's. I'm also here as a guest to talk about the Kerslake Commission, which St Mungo's is Secretariat for.
Fantastic, thank you. Alex.
Hi, Una. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Waits, and I'm the Strategic Director from SARI, which is Stand Against Racism and Inequality. We've been invited to join, which I'm very glad to have been invited. It makes a lot of sense. And I'm here representing, well, SARI and also Bristol Hate Crime and Discrimination Services. So we are delivering hate crime and discrimination services across the Bristol area. There's so many reasons why we're here, and also hopefully what we can offer. I mean, firstly is an on-the-ground understanding and knowledge around what's happening with regards to hate crime in the communities that you serve. We've got quite a lot of different working groups going on, very relevant to this board, and pieces of work that we're seeing through. For example, Klein was working on this as well, the Race and Housing Conference, which was looking at the learning from Bijan Ibrahimi and Kamal Ahmed Ali, and also a lot of other learning. Black Southwest Network will be obviously talking later around some of the work that's coming out of that too, and their housing report. And we want to make sure that that conference doesn't just remain a conference and some bits of paper in people's inbox somewhere, but that it turns into meaningful actions to improve race equality outcomes across the housing industry. And there's some really important outstanding work to be done. For example, hardly any chairs or senior leadership came from the housing associations of the city to that conference, which is very disappointing. And I'm going to say that there now, because I think, you know, that needs to be looked at, because that meant they weren't there to listen and to learn and to take away the, you know, really important leadership information for their organisations. We're also contracted to, we're delivering contracts to quite a lot of housing and social care providers and supported housing providers throughout the city. All of those have come about due to cases and issues, and we're now working with a number of yourselves included to improve equality, diversity, inclusion and race equality outcomes. So quite a lot I hope we can offer, as well as being all of your critical friend. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex, and absolutely hugely important work. And I think coincidentally, Seda, you're next on my screen, so if you could introduce yourself, and I think you're going to actually talk to one of those items a bit later on as well.
Yeah, thanks, Una. I'm Seda Jad, I'm Director of Black Southwest Network, a racial justice organisation based in Bristol and works across the Southwest. In terms of our interest, I think Alex has mentioned, we did research on housing, and I guess it's a priority focus around policy that would be taken forward. So very keen to take forward some of the recommendations, but also broaden that as we go forward. What we can bring to the board, I think our research and insight and work, but I also want to throw a challenge to the board, and that is, how do we begin to address racial inequality in housing? And I welcome the priority number one, which is looking at migrants and refugees, but I think it needs to be broader than that. So taking a race equality approach, because we're talking about second and third generation in Bristol who are being displaced through gentrification and other challenges. So yeah, it's a challenge to the board. How do we address that? Thank you.
Thank you. And Mark, because we've changed the agenda around a bit, I think Marvin's going to introduce how we've got, where we've arrived at those themes that we're looking at. So we haven't just made them up and where they come from. So thanks for that introduction. I've got Donald on my screen next, but there's no camera, so I'm not sure. Donald.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm sorry I'm being international man of mystery today, but despite numerous efforts, I can't get the video to switch on. I'm the interim director of Housing and Landlord Services for Bristol City Council.
Oh, welcome.
So my background is a tenants and welfare rights advocate, and about 30 years in the field of equality of opportunity, and as a campaigner to change various laws. My local government experiences as a director of housing and social services in a variety of London and city authorities, and chief executive for several years as well. So yeah, very pleased to be part and make a contribution. It's just unfortunate I can't get to see, or you can't get to see, the cut of my jib, as they say. But I always try to be an active participant in anything I take on, and obviously I'll be here to support Bristol City Council and our new cabinet member. Sorry,
Yes.
you can't see me, Tom.
But you can see us, and we can hear you, so that's great. Thank you, Donald. Only a few more to go now, so I've got Sarah next.
Hi everyone. I was really happy to be invited to this meeting. I'm the CEO of Missing Link, Next Link and Safe Link. So we provide a range of accommodation and community-based services in Bristol for women with mental health needs, women and children who are fleeing domestic violence and abuse, and also men, women and children who survive sexual violence and abuse. So we know that, you know, domestic violence and abuse is the leading cause of homelessness for women, which is why I was really pleased to be invited to this. My priority is to make sure that women's needs and women's safety is included throughout all, from governance, partnerships, development within the city around housing, and I really hope that this leads to more partnership working as well. So I've got a range of expertise of working with obviously local authority housing, but also housing associations as well, and some key partners in the room that we have current partnerships with as well, and would like to look at expanding that to make sure that women's needs are considered throughout, particularly women who face multiple disadvantage, such as violence and abuse.
Thank you, Sarah, and lovely to meet you. You're very new in post, aren't you, I think? So
I am. I just started in January. So
welcome. Again, yeah, hugely important work. We won't do this every time, by the way. I just thought it was useful at the start that we have to just get to know each other and who we are. But it's really helpful for me, and I think for Tom as well, just to know where everyone's coming from. Robert.
Hi, sorry I'm late. Hello, I'm Robert Curse. I'm Chief Operating Officer at the University of Bristol. In plain English, that means I'm responsible for most things you'd find in any organisation, such as property, people, finance, IT. I'm really thrilled to be continuing with the Homes and Communities Board. University of Bristol is one of the largest employers and landowners within the city. The success of our institution and that of the city are very much intertwined, and undertaking sustainable growth, good growth, is something we are very conscious about in terms of our civic role within the institution. I also think that I'm here because prior to working in higher education, I worked in social housing for about 14 years. Una took a risk on me when I was in my early 20s and employed me at Bristol Community Housing Foundation, where she was chief executive. And I worked in social housing for many years before joining the university. I'm also quite a long-standing trustee of the Young Persons Homeless Charity Centrepoint. And this board has really enabled actually some quite innovative projects in Bristol between students and young people who would otherwise be at risk of homelessness. For example, the project that Una brokered in Fish Ponds with 1625 independent people, the Launchpad project.
Thank you, Robert. So you're not just a Chief Operating Officer, you've got a huge wealth of experience, which we want to gain from. And I think also it's recognising the role that student housing plays in the city. It's a massive part of the city, isn't it? So we shouldn't ignore it. And very good link then to Jez about some of that innovation. Jez.
Yeah, thanks, Una. I'm Jez Sweetland. Good to see some of you that I know and new faces. I'm the project director for the Bristol Housing Festival. I think the quickest way of summarising that is to say that we set the Housing Festival up in partnership with, as an initiative of the One City, but also in partnership with the council, with a vision to saying how do we tackle this human cost of the affordability housing crisis, whilst we also tackle the climate crisis, but also there is a sort of challenge around the construction skills training needs of the city as well. And so that was the vision around how can we enable, support, equip, and deliver some modern methods of construction to that space as part of that solution. It's not a panacea, but what can it contribute, particularly around that zero carbon? And the idea of the festival, I think, is essentially how do we create a think and do tank mentality around using the city to test new ideas, to innovate, because some of the systemic challenges we face are so broken, we need to really have the courage to rethink and reimagine and repurpose. And hopefully you'll be aware of some of the projects we've been involved with. We're working very close with the council at the moment, and Elaine's team as well, around an Innovate UK project, which is delivering about 430 homes into the city, of about 60% will be affordable. And I think the final thing I'd say about the role here is that one of the things I think is really important that we do together as well is that we celebrate good news. We need to create a sort of testimony to the city of where we are getting things right. Because I think that so often there is a misunderstanding and a miscomprehension about the complexity of the challenges and the overlapping competing challenges that we face. And so together, how do we ensure that when we get it right, or we're learning to get it right, that we find a platform to celebrate that together, so that we create more trust and more hope, and therefore can do more things together to really tackle the challenges we face. So we're looking forward to working with you all in the next year.
Thank you, Jez. There's lots of houses going up in South Bristol, I see, partly supported through the Housing Festival. And finally, unless somebody waves their hand and says I've forgotten somebody, Terry. And Terry, I think you're going to present a little bit later as well on the first item, and then we'll probably need to leave because it's Terry's birthday today.
Hi everybody, it's my birthday. It was my day off, but I said that I would volunteer to come along to present to you. I'm in the Neighbourhood and Communities Service in Bristol City Council. I manage the community development team in South Bristol. Our service works alongside and supports the voluntary sector to thrive. So we've got good networks across the city with our voluntary sector partners. And also we do community development work. So we're working in the more challenged neighbourhoods where there's predominantly social housing. We work alongside residents and support them to build local capacity, develop local networks, build their confidence so they can do the things that they want to do and unlock and maximise their local assets in their communities, and also influence and co-produce and co-design services. So we've got good local knowledge, we've got the voice of local people, and we've got boots on the ground as well, so we can offer all of that, and we can offer some support around one of your priorities for this year.
Thank you, Terry. And I've actually forgotten somebody because they're not on my screen, which is Matt from Acorn.
Yeah. Hiya. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm Matt. I was elected to represent Acorn on the Homes Board. We're a community union of thousands of Bristolians. We've been going for about 5 years. We campaign on issues that are affecting low to medium income people. That's so far been largely focused on homes, unsurprisingly, as it's the single biggest expense for most people, and probably the cause of the most stress as well. But we've also campaigned around a whole range of other issues. And yeah, I'm here to represent the union.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks very much. And I think Acorn's very close to Tom's heart. He might want to talk.
Yeah, I'm actually Tom's previous position on the board was I'm replacing Tom as Acorn's representative. Basically.
But he's managed to stay on it, you know.
Sneaky like that.
Marvin, thank you everybody for that. And at least it's really hard to get to know each other like this. But at least when we speak, we'll know where we're coming from. If we can, thanks Marvin, just to introduce you. And we wanted you particularly to come along, Marvin, to set the scene really, because this is a relaunch. Although the Homes Board has been going for the last 4 years, I think. This is very much a relaunch. And Marvin, if you'd like to come in and just explain why it's important.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you all for being on the board. This is one of a number of boards, six thematic boards in the city that we've built under the city office. The others being health and well-being, children and young people, transport, connectivity, environment, economy. And these are the 6 themes that we say really kind of underpin the city story. And what we've tried to do is to, rather than waiting for the future to happen to us. Let's set out now what we want Bristol to be in 2050, and then everything that needs to, well, not everything, but those key things that need to happen year on year to become that thing in 2050. We know it's not perfect. We can't just pull levers and get outcomes in society. The economy doesn't work like that, but we stand a much better chance of becoming the thing we want to be if we said what we wanted to be and we've planned to become that thing, right? Things will come, blow us off course, but at least we set our stall out for what we're trying to get done as a city. The other benefit that brings is when we, as a city, agree what we want to get done, we can all begin to point our firepower towards it. So when you all on this board talk about what we want to do on housing, we've got city council, we've got political leadership, we've got community organisations, we've got universities, we've got Homes England, all agreeing what we're trying to get done and pointing at those things at the same time. By definition, we stand a much greater chance of getting those things done. So, thank you for that. If I can just mention to you something I've said since the very beginning with our One City approach, and it's about the culture and the approach that we bring to the meetings. I've been in Bristol for a long time, working in the voluntary sector, and we have our partnerships. But I think one of the qualities that I've constantly advocated for is graciousness. And by that, I mean, sometimes you're going to go to a meeting and it's not going to give you everything you wanted. It ain't going to run smooth. That is not the time to walk away and go, well, that was a rubbish meeting. That's the time to remind yourself of the challenge you're taking on. Is it the right challenge? And if it is, stay at the table. Because if these things were easy to solve, we'd have done them a long time ago, whether it be on housing delivery, private rental sector, public stock, shackles of gentrification, safety and community, race and inequalities, and in housing. These things are not easy, which is why we've asked for a Homes Board, so that we get that collective intellectual and organisational firepower to help us take on these really wicked challenges facing not just Bristol, but cities all around the world, actually. In terms of the way I have been describing Bristol is that, this is a city with a fantastic story to tell to the outside world, 2 world-class universities, thriving creative sector, foodie city, loads of arts all over the place. All that stuff is true, but 1 in 4 of our children live in income-deprived households. And that is not just a moral responsibility to take that stuff on. It's actually a political liability, and I would say increasingly an economic liability. It means that we don't, in one of the most socially immobile countries in OECD, it means that talent goes undeveloped, families remain unstable, end up on public services, the political cohesion is weaker. So actually it's in our enlightened self-interest. So we need to take that challenge on of how we protect that ambition and celebrate it, but make sure that it's a different kind of economic development, one that actually includes people rather than compounding inequalities. Housing is a key policy tool on that front. A quality, affordable, warm home is one of the single most effective policy interventions we can make to improve health, improve life chances, break the cycle of inherited disadvantage that is passed on through social immobility. And so that's why this is such a critical board. We are faced with meeting a housing challenge that is not just for today's population of 460,000 people, but for 2050's population, which is going to be around 550,000 on current trajectories. That makes this, when now I'm getting more tweets saying, stop building houses, right? That's not a viable option. And one of the things I would encourage this board to do is help the city have a very mature and pragmatic conversation around what we do with land. Right? We've written an ecological strategy recently, and Ian Barrett, who's Chief Executive of Avon Wildlife Trust, says this is not an anti-development document. What it means is we need to do development well. When we need to do development in a way that decarbonizes, not just decarbonizes building, but decarbonizes lifestyles. So I think what that means is building centrally and more densely. That brings us into the conversation around height and all that other thing that people then start throwing around. But we either give everyone a back garden and sprawl, or we build more densely and some of us live on top of each other, right? There's a price for both options. And we, as a city, I've been somewhat kind of dismayed at the poor quality of discussion that happens on Twitter, or these people that exist on social media, when we cannot have that kind of grown-up conversation, as a city. So we've got to be involved in that conversation. We've got to be involved in delivery, practical delivery, but I'd also say shaping the city's conversation around the decisions we make when we come to look at questions of delivery, right? And sometimes it's such a superficial conversation. There is a conversation around the existing stock, be that in RPs, council stock, estate renewal, but also private rental sector and student accommodation. How do we bring that together to make sure there's a quality of life for people living in those, but we are building communities in which neighbours know neighbours and they are resilient. One of the lessons I think from COVID is one of the biggest forces we had for food resilience was not just our council processes that we did with the city office, but neighbours who could knock on a neighbour's door and say, do you need us to go shopping for you? Building that resilience into our future is going to be critical in a world that's increasingly likely to face shocks, be they climate, environmental, political, or whatever. If I can also ask you also to think really proactively about what you would say to the other thematic boards. If you want to say something about mental health, please talk to and make an offer and then ask the other boards. You want to talk about what it means to what you can do for children and what other people could do for children in your housing stock. Talk to the Environment and Sustainability Board about waste, minimizing waste in our housing infrastructure, retrofitting homes, building homes that have air source heat, right? Which is going to be one of our big challenges as we move away from gas boilers. Please enter into those conversations. And again, bring your collective firepower, your knowledge of the funding landscape, the investment landscape, the practical challenges to bear, so that we as a city are grabbing this stuff by the scruff of the neck and laying out a pathway to good homes in good communities without destroying the planet. And the last thing, I'm going to jump, I've got a councillor here, sorry to talk and run, but the last thing I would really ask you to think about some of those other big challenges. Gentrification. I've been watching and listening to a lot of talks on gentrification the last couple of weeks. I got into trouble because I talked about the first people that raise their voice on gentrifiers are actually the first wave of gentrifiers. Right? So that normally the people that get gentrified first are the voiceless people. And then people move in and then they run campaigns on gentrification when the next wave of people comes in and impacts on them, right? So I got in a lot of trouble for raising that with someone. There's a line in an African-American friend said to me that once that he was talking to a campaign against gentrification and he said to them, well, why don't you ask the Puerto Rican family that used to live in your house? Yeah. Right? People lack self-awareness. But what we need to do is it's not blaming anyone, but it's about I think this is one of the wicked challenges facing us. Spike Lee's been talking about this recently. It is a ferocious challenge facing us, what's happening to our communities, how it undermines stability, breeds resentment. And there's a lot of political self-righteousness flies around in that space. Some of that needs to be punctured, to be frank, but I think we need a mature conversation around how we as a city can be on the forefront of tackling that challenge that is facing all cities, around the world. So yeah, I thank you for being on the board. I'm sorry, I'm talking to Amal, one of our new councillors now, and I look forward to you working with Tom and Una and Jez and and everyone else that's on this to really see what we can do as a city. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marvin. Thanks for coming along. We'll do our best on all those subjects challenge there.
Yeah. You have the solution by the end of August, right? So
yeah, should do. Take care.
Take care.
Bye. So thank you. Thanks everyone for introducing yourself just now. It's a big group. It's going to be a struggle about how we manage the contributions. We've got the chat box. You're all used to using those now, so do use those. Do raise your hands as well. To try and make a contribution. I think we're going to have to work out how we manage to make sure that people get their voice heard and that we can actually do some practical stuff. We do have the next presentation we've got, which is really important. I'm not used to council meetings, by the way, so you'll have to tell me how to do this. What does public forum mean? Do we have to do anything?
Hi Chair, yeah, no, we haven't received any public forum for this particular meeting. Had we done so, that would be dealt with. That's questions and statements, but that's probably something for the future.
Yeah, Tom can do that in future, can't you, Tom? You know that. So we are going to have a presentation now by Paul. I can't see him on the screen. Is he here?
Yeah. Hi.
Where's Paul? Can't see you. Oh, he's not on my screen. That's probably why. Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah. Everyone hear
me? Oh, there you
okay?
are. You're on my second page. Yeah. Hi,
right.
Paul.
Okay.
So Paul has had nothing to do over the last year. it's been completely idle, haven't you, Paul? Making sure that people can have somewhere to live and not be on the streets. And hey, that's been such a success, hasn't it? That it took a pandemic for us to actually recognise we had to get rough sleepers off our streets. Shouldn't have been that, should it? But I know we're facing a big challenge now as we come out of whatever we're in. And so Paul's going to take us through some of the learning from the last year and also some next steps.
Thank you. Right, so I'm going to, first challenge is to find the PowerPoint presentation to share. Which unfortunately I'm struggling with at the moment. Great, okay, here we go. Right, can everybody see that? Thumbs up would be good. Yep, marvellous. Right, okay. It's going to go on to screen share now, slideshow. Okay. Right, yeah, so yeah, great to see you all. I'm here today talking about homelessness in Bristol. I'm going to do a bit of reflecting, looking back at the last year, and then towards the end set out the challenges for the year ahead and what I think our priorities are as a city. If I just power through the presentation, then we'll leave some time at the end for questions. Okay. So I'm going to start off by reflecting on 2021 and what is over 12 months of our Everyone In response. So just a reminder of what the challenge was. Our challenge in March 2020 was to provide COVID secure accommodation and support, to get everyone off the streets, to house everyone who was in one of the 5 night shelters in Bristol that had to close, and to prevent people from rough sleeping. And all of this was done for anybody who was homeless, irrespective of recourse to public funds and levels of vulnerabilities. So in terms of accommodation, within 4 weeks, we'd managed to secure nearly 300 rooms in 3 hotels and 2 youth hostels. But the response is so much more than just providing accommodation. We set up a COVID care facility with our community health provider in Bristol, which is a place where clients who are symptomatic or tested positive to COVID could go and be looked after and get better. Thankfully, we didn't have to use it very often, and it came to an end in July. Some amazing work by teams based in hotels providing support. If you can imagine, some of the hotels that we had over 100 people in them. So within a matter of weeks, we created the biggest supported housing schemes in the Southwest. And really hats off to organisations like St Mungo's and Golden Key, who did an incredible job. You know, amazing collaboration across the board, working with drug and alcohol services and health services, in particular the Homeless Health Service. And the voluntary sector and charities really stepped up. Just make one mention, not going to be able to mention everybody, but the amazing Cheers Drive initiative that Caring in Bristol delivered, which meant that people in hotels were given hot meals every day, and over 100,000 hot meals were delivered. Within the City Council, we created a homelessness social care team in response to the reality that a lot of homeless clients have social care needs. And something that I'm really proud of, and it's a great privilege to be part of, was the work with the refugee and homelessness sector, looking at how we support clients with no recourse to public funds in Bristol. So we house people in emergency accommodation, but we needed to move them on, right, to something that met their needs. So within the year, a big call out to private landlords. We housed around 350 people in affordable private rented accommodation, up 100 on the year before. We secured 196 units of private rented accommodation in a scheme in South Bristol. all housing associations and the city council landlord worked really well with them in terms of letting more properties to people who were homeless, either in hotels or supported housing, to create that move on. And we put in a successful bid to the Next Steps Accommodation programme to secure 48 units of supported move on accommodation. But what did this mean to clients? So a few bullet points with some key outcomes there. So 1,669 people housed during that period, 831 successful move-ons. It hasn't worked out for some people. We've never given up. We've kept on trying, but at the moment there were 15 people of that big 1,669 who are currently rough sleeping where we previously provided accommodation. Very small number of COVID cases and no reported COVID deaths. So it worked. What we did worked. Improved engagement with clients in substance use treatment. And some of the learning that's coming out of this is the clear benefits of people not living in shared dormitory style accommodation and having their own room, in terms of them progressing and being better able to move on into accommodation. And the fundamental thing really is that, you spend less time on the streets. It means there's reduced trauma, reduced impact on physical and mental health, and reduced demand on acute services. So what about the accommodation that we've been using? So first thing I want to say is that the government funding for emergency accommodation as part of Everyone In has ended. So we've been, for the last few months, focusing very much on moving people on and phasing out our use of hotels and hostels. We've successfully done that for 3 out of the 5 sites. Our remaining hotel will end at the end of July with a planned manageable reduction in placements. And our remaining hostel, we hope, will be available for St Mungo's Prevention Service to use to support people who are new to the streets until next April. So just a little bit more information on people with no recourse and those with low level vulnerability. So these are clients that the council wouldn't normally provide emergency accommodation for, but we did because it was a response to the pandemic. And we were very much committed to making sure that wherever possible, nobody returned to the streets. So brilliant interagency working and planning meetings with partners, focused on solutions and move on options for clients, which isn't easy, particularly for people with no recourse to public funds. The accommodation has ended for most people at the end of, the 17th of May. We are, however, continuing to accommodate clients who are clinically vulnerable until the end of June. And the Julian Trust, who are unable to open as a night shelter at the moment, are funding 9 places in temporary accommodation for people with no recourse. And I'm pleased to say that because of the joint working that we've carried out, that this has meant that very few people have actually returned to the streets. So I've got a few graphs, a few bits of data for you here. So this is probably the most pleasing one in terms of the number of people rough sleeping counted at our bi-monthly rough sleeping count. And you can see the high of 130, I think, in June or July in 2019, and how from March last year it came down as part of our efforts around Everyone In. So lowest level since 2012. Some of our long-term rough sleepers have been housed, and it says effective joint working. I think I need to up my game in terms of superlatives. It really was just brilliant working between the council of St Mungo's, both owning the response to reducing rough sleeping and coming up with solutions for anybody who's on the streets. We currently and estimating there's around about mid-40s people on the streets at the moment, just for your information. So this is quite a busy slide. This is talking about homelessness presentation, so people that were approaching the council for help. The one slide in the top right hand corner shows the increasing trend in people approaching the council, peaking during the first 3 months of everyone in. The slide on the bottom left gives 1920 and 2021 numbers of people approaching the council for various reasons. So what this really shows us is how COVID impacted on families and relationships. We had a 100% increase in people becoming homeless because they were told to leave by families or friends. A 25% increase in people approaching us because of domestic abuse, and a 55% increase in relationship breakdown. There were some categories where we had lower presentations, in particular people leaving asylum accommodation because of the pause on decisions and asking people to leave. Right, the last slide, again quite busy, but let me take you through it, is on temporary accommodation. So first of all, I thought I'd give a comparison of cities, and what I've done is, because every city is a different size, is that we've done TA placements per 100,000 population. So we've got Birmingham, Brighton and Manchester and Nottingham. So cities that we quite often compare ourselves to. And it's clear that before COVID and now Bristol had lower levels of temporary accommodation than these cities. But there has been quite a steep increase in TA in Bristol during the last 12 months. The little stars on some of the bars are because we don't have the data, and that's estimated. So in the top right-hand corner, we're telling the story of singles and couples without children and families in temporary accommodation. And it's very much a story of single homelessness in the last year. Families with children in temporary accommodation has gone up by 11%. But the increase in singles has been, absolutely massive, up by 330% compared to before COVID. And every lockdown, we saw a surge in homelessness, with the biggest increase in homelessness in lockdown 3. Okay, so we've got challenges and priorities. So there's quite a lot of really difficult stuff on this slide that we're going to be facing as a city this year. Not only are we, if we got increasing levels of homelessness because of COVID, that continues. The number of people approaching us is still higher than pre-COVID. We've got a significant issue around securing buildings for services that were displaced, who previously provided shelter accommodation. We've got some structural issues around local housing allowance being frozen. We've got some of the great things that the government did to prevent homelessness coming to an end, with the eviction ban ending soon and the uplift in universal credit ending in September, as will the furlough scheme. Bizarrely, the discretionary housing payment award this year, which is what we use to do a lot of good prevention work, is 30% lower than last year, even though we know that we're going to have significant challenges this year. And we always live in an environment of uncertainty around grant funding. And just one really good study here, so I recommend you looking at this. And if the findings of the study are applied to Bristol, it shows that nearly 5,500 people privately renting are in arrears, and nearly another 5,000 will fall into arrears during this year. So taking all of that into account, what are our priorities? So it's very much about preventing homelessness, reducing households in temporary accommodation and increasing move on. There are a number of things that we're looking at. These aren't all of them, but I'll just put a selection down of the key ones for you. Opportunities for further collaboration, working with clients that are coming out of prison, out of hospitals. We look forward to hopefully having a co-located domestic abuse specialist with us. We really want to focus in on supporting families. Significant number of people are homeless because they've been told to leave by families or friends. So looking at what more we can do to support families to hold on to people, either permanently or for a period of time, so we can plan people's move on. Work to be done on engaging with private landlords and tenants to prevent homelessness. It's an ongoing piece of work. We really need to focus in as a local authority on reducing our spend on temporary accommodation, which is a big pressure for us. We want to continue good work of increasing placements in the private rented sector. We're going to keep going and putting in bids to MHCLG and Homes England to increase the supply of supported move-on accommodation for single people that are homeless. Very much looking at innovation in creating additional supply for people with complex needs, and Housing First is one of those things. And we are exploring that much needed longer term funding with partners, in particular CCG and Adult Social Care. Submitted a bid, the local authority in partnership with Golden Key and others, to Changing Futures. And interestingly, the Wreckham Mayor's talking more about homelessness, which is a change. I think the last Wreckham Mayor talked about homelessness at all. Talk of a homelessness task force. So we just need to understand what that is and how we can work with the West of England Combined Authority on that. So I've got a couple of asks here of the board and just a question. So the first ask, and it's something that I think we mentioned the last time that I came to this board and did a presentation, which is generally around everybody and everyone in the city doing what they can to help people sustain their accommodation. Prevention and early intervention is so much better than having to deal with homelessness. And quite a specific ask around the challenge that we have around securing accommodation for organisations to support people who would have otherwise been placed in dormitory style shelters, and our desire to move away from that model. So we've got a couple of asks there, and just a question around how would the board like me to keep you updated on homelessness so that you can provide oversight and track progress. So that's the end of the presentation. I don't know if you want me to leave that up or if you want me to stop sharing.
Yeah,
so
actually, Paul, can you stop it, because then we can't see anyone.
There you go.
Thank you very much, Paul. I mean, what struck me is how something like the pandemic came along and actually enabled us to stop the rough sleeping largely, and how do we stop ourselves going back into that space? And you know, some of those lessons that we learned from it. I know a lot of it was the funding that we got through and the joint working, but that's probably where we need to focus, is what have we learned that we don't go back into that space straight away. I'm aware that we've got Tom and I are going to hand over in a minute, aren't we? Tom's going to take over. We're running a bit late. We've got about 5. If we extend it a bit, we've got about 5 minutes. If we've got any comments and also responses to Paul's ask of us and what we do, I think it probably is something that we need to do in a smaller group than this, but I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. David?
Yeah, just a reflection really, that slightly just over a year ago from now, we were in fear that we would see a large number of people die who were in shared accommodation or sleeping rough, and really there was a point where we were preparing to advocate on behalf of our clients for access to ventilators, which we thought that was what the conversation was going to be. And through huge and enormous joint work with all the partners that has been mentioned, and in particular Public Health, Department of Bristol City Council and Public Health England, actually we've had a really, really far-reaching proactive outbreak management, infection prevention and control regime that's been incredibly successful. One of the things that worked for us to make everyone in happen were additional powers and funding given to the local authority to take over accommodation that was left vacant by people who couldn't use it in hotels, and that's not available to us now. And the dormitories we used to use aren't available because of shared accommodation not being possible because of the infection risk. therefore we're at a particular risk point in terms of that increasing. The thing that I'm frequently saying at this board is homelessness isn't something that stands still. It's not a group of people who we need to solve the situation for. It's a group of a much larger group of people who experience homelessness for a short period of time. So there's quite a turnover of people, and so it's something we're constantly having to solve just to stand still. And so really, from our point of view, that question about buildings and prevention, those are really the two key needs that we have.
Thanks, David. Helen.
Thanks, and thanks, Paul. That was an excellent presentation, and big respect to you and your team for the amazing work that you've done. And it's been good to work with you on some of the move on accommodation and funding. It's really good. You've got those two very clear asks, and the prevention is really important. And we must ask all of our housing association partners, for example, to continue to work on that. But new supply is key. So I just wanted to flag that we have got another round of the rough sleeper accommodation programme. Bristol City Council is working so hard to bring forward proposals to deliver homes, but Bristol can't do it alone. And so again, just a shout out to all of our housing association partners, and to ask the question, what can you do in this space? And please pick up the phone to myself, Paul, or others, and the link to the prospectus is in the chat.
Thanks, Helen. I'm wondering if we put in the chat if people would want to be part of a smaller conversation around this, particularly picking up Paul's point about the the lives that were saved, the acute admissions to hospitals that were saved, the GP visits. There's a massive amount probably of savings to the health sector and some of the acute services. So we can't have that bigger conversation now, and I'm sure you've done some of that work, Paul, but if you could put in the chat box and Dee can collect it if you'd like to be part of another conversation about this, or what we might practically do to help Paul and the team. I think we've got some more hands, but I'm just wondering a little bit about time. I can't see them on my screen now. Sorry, it seems to have
got one of the hands up.
Sorry?
Alex.
Hi, Alex. Hi.
Sorry, Alex, there's been about 3 other people with their hands up before you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just go very quickly. It's Penny here from Shelter. I just wanted to acknowledge what the work that David and his teams and Paul and everybody else across the sector have done, which has been magnificent. And I think the fact that we can reflect that in Bristol we haven't had any COVID-related deaths within this proportion of our community is a real kind of testament to the success of that work. What I would say is I think there's a couple of things that stand out to me, and I really want to flag them to the board. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to resolve them, but I think we do need to bear in mind. I think it's really important that this board receives regular information about homelessness, because I think it's an early indicator of what is happening to our communities within the city, and also where the real tension points are for people who are on low incomes or in very insecure living conditions. I also want to really flag that issue around single homelessness that came up in Paul's slides. It's an ongoing issue for Bristol, but also our experience within the advice sector, which feeds into Paul's data, is that actually what came out of the pandemic was the number of people who are relying on insecure housing situations in order to live in Bristol. So I'm talking about people lodging, basically. The number of people that came to various advice agencies because they thought they had a long-term solution to their housing issue that was affordable. And actually when push came to shove, they were in a really difficult position. So I think as well as asking about looking at dorm style accommodation, we do need to help people to find a more sustainable housing solution rather than relying on something that's actually a short-term answer to kind of like fixed working or something like that. So those were the 2 points I wanted to raise.
Thanks, Penny. I'm going to take one more and then I'm going to stop it if that's okay. Laura.
2 little questions. I mean, I endorse everything that everyone else has said, including how fantastic the work has been that you've managed to protect so many people during the pandemic. I was just wondering if there was a specific reason why there had been a sharp increase since January on one of your slides in terms of incidents. But also Sado and I both wondered if you've got any information on the equalities profile of those that you've worked
with. So the last question first, yes, absolutely. Haven't shared it, but we collect qualities data for all our clients that we work with. So that's certainly something that we could look at providing.
Yeah,
and I think
if you could, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, and I think the slight increase might have been, I forget, maybe it was the rough sleeping one, but it was up from a historic low of 20 something to 40 odd, and then it's sort of plateaued at that sort of level. But yeah, so no particular reasons for that apart from the flow onto the streets, the number of people becoming homeless at any one point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So I'm going to hand over to Tom now to try to reclaim the 15 minutes that I've lost. Sorry. But we've got offers in the chat box. So dear, if we can collect those, I've written down some names. We've got suggestion from Gavin about land age as well, which is really good. And I think we also got the agreement, Paul, that we'd like to have regular reports, please, just to keep us up to date.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we offline agree that the smaller group will get together with you to look at how we can take that ask back as well. We can use it for the different forums we're involved in, including the city leaders as well, I think.
Great.
Thanks.
That's really good. Thanks everybody. Thanks for your feedback and your questions. I'll see you again soon. Take care.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul.
Bye.
Take care. So Tom, I'm now handing over to you for the next half of the meeting, or not quite half.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think what we'll do, if it's okay, along with some conscious, I want to make sure we get to have time on each of these three goals. Is we'll kind of shorten each of those for 15 minutes rather than the 20 minutes we had planned, so we try and finish on time, so we'll know that you will have other things to get onto. So without further ado, I'm going to hand straight over to Terry, who I think is going to lead the first discussion.
So hi, I've come to talk about one of your key priorities for 2021, which is develop a pilot programme with Bristol communities, particularly council properties, to develop and increase communal access to communal and green spaces. I'd really be interested in maybe changing the council properties to maybe social housing properties to be more encompassing with housing providers. So I was just going to talk a little bit about the opportunities, and then a couple of challenges as I see them, and then I've got a couple of questions to give to the board. So so the opportunities around this is around COVID-19. We've been in lockdown for almost about a year on and off, and people have really been rediscovering their local areas and trying to maximise them and utilise them better. And as we come out of lockdown, people will be meeting each other outdoors because people don't have confidence to be in big groups at the moment and be indoors and indoor spaces. So this means that our green spaces are at more of a premium than ever. And that, by people using and meeting outside, that will build people's confidence to try and move back to some kind of normality at some point when we can. Generally, I would say that there's a lack of investment in green spaces in Bristol. It's a bit of a sweeping statement, but I would say that, and I think my parks and my housing colleagues hopefully don't disagree with me on that. And by working alongside people in communities, they can bring additional resources into our infrastructure and assets in communities. So if they're supported and we work with them, then that can have benefits to bring in those additional resources in those communities. In neighbourhoods where there's a lot of building, Una talked about a lot of building going on in South Bristol. That's also, driving up the premium of those green spaces, because communities are seeing existing green spaces going now to development. So what green spaces they've got make them more prime and more important for those communities, and also for them not to be lost, but also for them to be invested in better. And we've seen an increase, certainly in parks. Parks have seen an increase as we're coming out of lockdown, of people coming forward saying we want to do things in parks and in green spaces. So there's a real opportunity there. There's a lot of energy in communities to maximise their green spaces. For me, where it says develop a pilot, I mean, how we work in the community development team is we work on a neighbourhood level. So instantly I think about, okay, is there a neighbourhood somewhere where there's energy, where people want to do things that we can work alongside, to develop a pilot, and what might that look like? So that's the kind of question mark there. And then just I've got a really nice story. So it's lockdown. Last year, there's a woman in Sea Mills that one of my team comes across, and she's talking about planting a Japanese forest in Sea Mills. And she's got these big ideas, but she doesn't know where to start. So one of my team members chats to her. Anyway, as it was in probably July. So she goes, so you could go out and have contact with people in between the lockdowns. And she went and consulted with 500 people in her community, knocking on doors, having conversations outside, social distanced. And then around 10 people wanted to come and help her. There was a connection with the landowner, and the landowner said, yes, this is an opportunity. It'll be great for some investment into this space. And over the winter, they've planted 500 trees, and they're planting one of the only Japanese, I'd call it a forest or a woodland. There's only probably 2 of them in the whole country, and they're planting it, and they've been enabled to do that, and they've found their own resources and brought that to the table. So that's a really positive opportunity. Some of the challenges, one of the challenges I see is that in a neighbourhood, as a resident or a local person, green space is green space, and you don't see the different landowners who own the land. So if I say I want to do something over there and someone says, no, you can't because that belongs to so-and-so, you need to do it over here, that can be a really difficult conversation. And there's lots. So I think for this project, you need to bring different landowner together. So there's kind of one place to have these discussions. So that includes social landlords, parks. The university have talked about how they own land, highways and housing, Bristol City Council housing. So there's kind of one conversation, and residents aren't butted to and from different places, different processes, different people to try and find and contact to make things happen, because that loses energy for people in communities. And then also there's changing the conversation. So and it's really important how we work alongside people in communities. So I've talked about a positive, where a lady was enabled, but I want to talk about a challenge for some men. So there's a group of men who wanted to do a gardening project, and they approached a landlord on this green space that's disused, and there's fly tipping on this site. And they asked if they could do something on that space. And their offer was, yeah, you can. We'll give you a 1-year lease. For that group of men, they're very distrustful of authority, and they're very used to things being taken away in their community. That's the feeling for them. So they were saying, oh, we'll take over this land, we'll put in loads of hard work, and after a year, it's just going to be taken away from us. So that's putting us on edge. We're not sure about doing that. Also, the area is subject to fly tipping. And the deal was when they signed the lease, any fly tipping on that site, they would have to remove. So these men have got underlying mental health issues. They don't have access to transport. And they were saying, well, this is a big commitment. The landowner already has to move the fly tipping. Why should it become our responsibility? They've moved off that site. That site's still overgrown. It's still got fly tipping, but it hasn't got any community use. So we really need to think about how we work alongside and support our communities so they can enable them to have more ownership and have more involvement in their green spaces. So there's a couple of challenges, there's a couple of opportunities, and I guess my question for the board is how do you want to take this forward? Okay, how do we want to form a working group to work on it? Is there a place or a neighbourhood or a community that you're aware of that we could go and work with, where there might be energy? I've got a suggestion of one, but I don't want to put that into the mix if you already know of where we can do. And also, are you up for changing that conversation so we enable communities to be able to do things rather than disable them with our processes and bureaucracy? That's it from me.
Thank you, Terry. Go to Laura's got your hand up. You're on mute, Laura.
Clicked it and nothing happened. Yeah, sort of by way of an offer, I suppose. We have 2 projects linked to environmental action at the moment, one of which is a disabled people-led accessible roll and stroll. Other people might call it a walking group. And that's for any disabled person who lives in the city. So by all means, if you've got people who feel that they don't know much about green spaces but want to get out and learn more, then do put them our way. The other one is that we have, we're part of the city's Community Climate Action Project. And we are doing research into, co-producing a community climate action plan with disabled people that specifically addresses their needs, and would be very happy to talk to any groups in your area about that. And if you've got people, for example, who want to take over land, we'd be happy to chat to them about how to make it accessible.
That's great. Jess? Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Just Terry, I think just to say, I think it's so essential, this issue, and we talk about housing, but I'm always thinking, well, how do we ensure that the way we think about housing is this enabling people to thrive? You know, it's about improving people's mental and physical health. And the example you gave about the men, I think, is a really interesting challenge around. There's actually a lot of complexity in terms of those different landowners, different responsibilities, how that responsibility and the sort of access to land, is it a permanent access to land? So it's a meanwhile solution, in which case, what does that mean in the longer term? I think what I'd love to think about that we could do on this board is find a couple of projects and use those as real test beds of how do you create a systemic wrapper to allow that not just to be a one-off, but that you can go to other community groups and say, okay, we found a way through and this is the learning we can share. Because the danger is otherwise, you know, I'm aware for council officers getting involved, community groups getting involved, if it's each time it's piecemeal, it's one-off, it's very, very difficult to replicate it. So could we find, led by you, 1 or 2 projects that we go, these are the ones we're going to champion. But the exam question that we're posing is, how do we ensure that we can create some real usable, systemic answers to this to help other people navigate those questions and those opportunities that you presented? That would be what I hope we could do.
Thanks, Jez. Terry, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's great input from Jez. Yeah, we can have a look and have a think about some of the projects. I mean, when I talked about the men, they're in Knoll West, and that's one probably, like, you know, if there was a neighbourhood that we wanted to work in, I'd think like having a conversation with those men and trying to get them back into that space is an opportunity. And then there's some other suggestions that are in the chat there around Temple Gardens that Gavin's mentioned. So I'd like to hear more about that and the opportunity there. So I don't know if Gavin wants to mention something.
Gavin?
Oh, was that for me then, Terry? Sorry. I was just conscious of time, so I thought I'd put messages on. As part of my last project with my previous business, we started off the process of looking at Temple Church and Temple Gardens, the city centre, about bringing that back to life, led by so we funded the Architecture Centre. I've now got Historic England involved. And I think there's a real opportunity there in Temple Gardens, which is a kind of hidden little gem in the city centre, but has got some antisocial behaviour challenges, but also I was approached by serving officers of the fire brigade who have had a hard year, as you can imagine, and I've got some challenges around mental health, and we're keen to get involved in a project. And they actually asked me whether I could create a garden on Temple Fire Station, but it wasn't possible to do that for a number of operational reasons. But I think there might be an opportunity to kind of help support from serving officers with maybe community groups in Temple Gardens. I'm going to put you into touch with my colleagues at the Architecture Centre and Historic England about looking at that space potentially.
Please do make some connections and link me up.
Sure.
Have a conversation. That'd be great.
Yeah, but also don't rule out the private sector as well, Terry. I know this is a very kind of public sector focused group, rightly or wrongly, but there are opportunities to kind of reclaim bits of pavement and bits of wide road and things like that, and create some pocket parks and things like that can be moved around. And simple 3 up 4 parking spaces with some nice planting and seating, create a nice little place to sit. In the city, across the city as well.
Thank you, Gavin. So I think I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to move us on. But I think just in terms of taking this forward, I think if people are interested in having a smaller conversation, perhaps as part of a working group, and just indicate in the chat, well, we will make sure we capture the chat, for the minutes as well. Because I think it'd be useful to pass these suggestions back. And I think you made a really well made point earlier, Terry, around sort of think about community organising, essentially the approaches. How can we empower communities to make these changes for themselves and then strip out the bureaucracy as much as possible in the process, so that we're enabling people and not kind of putting blocks in the road, whether that's kind of a right or wrong perception. Brilliant. So we'll move on to discussion of goal 2. I think I'm handing over to Stado for this one.
I am really sorry that there has been miscommunication. I was due to leave at 3:30, so I have to jump off, but I've just left a message. I will share the research report. Happy to present at the next meeting, but I think the key ask is just setting up a working group to look at race and housing, and more than happy to lead that from BSWN. So anyone that's interested to explore that, please share in the chat box and I can pick up. But happy to present the next meeting. Really, really sorry.
Thanks, Seda, and apologies for the error there. I'm really happy to be involved in a working group, so do include me in that, and we'll put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, thanks, Sado. So, all right, we'll go on to goal 3 then, which I think is Jez.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So, how do we increase within the city our commitment to delivering zero carbon and also retrofitting some of the existing housing stock? And I think before we get into this, it's just important to reference that there's been a lot of work done on this in terms of some of the other boards, and of course Bristol One City climate strategy. And within that, there's a whole theme around retrofit and the heat decarbonisation plan. And of course, we can't talk about housing and the sort of net zero carbon agenda without thinking about the heat that's going into those homes. I think it's also worth reflecting that we've got to work so closely on this with the ecology challenge, because the reality is that the way that we use our existing land and the way that we bring that land into using, particularly for new housing, if it's not complementary to and working with nature, we sort of start on the back foot. And of course, there's a lot of sensitivity and political challenge around that at the moment. So how does some of those spaces that have been identified for new housing, how can they work really well with nature? And it goes, I suppose, a little bit into the previous conversation about making accessible quality green spaces for people's well-being and the importance of working with nature. The other thing that strikes me is it's very, we've got a 2030 challenge. So I suppose, to be blunt to us as a board, we need to be very much working with that 2030 envelope, but we also need to be working urgently now. We need to be converting from, I suppose, discussion and strategy into real delivery. And that's difficult because the national framework for some of this discussion is still not formed. So we've got issues around future home standard, and that's difficult for a lot of delivery partners, because they're on one hand, they're waiting to see where national government policy will go. Well, why can't we as a board agree that what Bristol is going to do, working with Bristol Council, working with the RPs in our area and developers, and set a standard that we think is a right standard approach? And I think to give credit there to the council, that has been some of the work that's been going on. So if I think about some of the schemes I've been involved with, where we have been using MMC to look at zero carbon or lower carbon. It's been great to see some of those partners working very hard to make sure that we are delivering schemes that have no gas. And they've sort of relying on those air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps and solar, so that we're starting that journey of discovery. We have also used MMC, I think, as some of you will know, to deliver some zero carbon. But this is a complex challenge when the whole agenda around zero carbon is not yet clarified around even what measure we're going to talk about. Are we talking about in-use carbon? Are we talking about embodied carbon or even whole life carbon? So we do have a complex challenge around this, but I think what we also need to do is start to deliver. So I think the challenge I would bring to us as a board is, again, what can we be doing in the next year of schemes that are coming forward where we can use those to create that learning opportunity to shine a light to what the opportunity looks like. And I think there are a number of schemes already in the pipeline that we should be using to call to our commercial partners to say, well, what are the schemes that you're working on? What are the needs? Where's the viability gap? How can we work with Homes England and other partners to bring that funding? And indeed, there's conversations happening right now with WECA to look at some of that challenge around some of that viability gap. The net zero carbon agenda is not just about the way that we build, is it? It's also going to be about active travel. So that whole wraparound thinking about where we're building, how we're building, and what we're building. And also, how do we celebrate good news as a way of celebrating that progress? So it was interesting to me, just recently Snug have built their first house, and that's now got a resident living in it. And that's a great story of local suppliers, local SMEs. So we're looking both for that full spectrum of partnership, including that community-led approach, because again, there's ways there to really empower citizens and communities to get involved in this story. So I think we have a challenge here. This is a wickedly complex problem. And I think my biggest fear about the net zero carbon challenge is we could end up fixing the technical challenge and forgetting people. So we end up with these beautifully, thermal tight bridged homes that are zero carbon. And actually we've not designed the right places to help people thrive. We've not done it in partnership with nature. So when we're thinking about zero carbon, how are we ensuring that we're really doing it in a way that is holistic and not just essentially a technical fix? And the final thing I'd say about that is this is about economics. So working again, it's been very interesting and huge respect to, again, the work Bristol City Council are doing around their social value policy. How do we make the economics work? Because a lot of this is, if you think about buying a new iPhone, you wouldn't expect to go to the market and get a better performing, more higher spec phone cheaper. And this is one of the problems, is that one of the ways that we currently think about housing is how do we get the prices down, but how do we actually create a narrative around better value? And the Social Value Act, to my mind, certainly has a way of starting to think about that, how we use that land for the longer term, for the wisdom of that longer term use. So my challenge to us as a board really is we need to be working very closely with those other boards. We do have some news to come out quite soon that's just slowly trickling out about what's called the Nesta Smart Cities Climate Challenge. And we have, working with the one city, we applied to that. And Bristol is one of the 4 cities that's going to be working internationally. I think the other cities are in Colombia, Uganda, and Brazil. And Bristol is one of those. That's going to be announced formally, our sort of role in that in October at the International Expo in Dubai. But the reason that's important is I think it gives us an opportunity to draw lots of different stakeholders into that and talk and set a challenge. We're right at the process of setting the challenge, and the challenge we're looking at for that is how does the economics work to really drive net zero carbon, and to do, you look at the retrofit challenge, how can we create that think and do tank mentality? We have a lot of the innovation out there. We have a lot of the technology innovation. We don't yet know how to apply it, to deliver it at scale, or to fund it. So that would be my thought about that. So I think we have a huge challenge. And I think the great thing about the net zero carbon challenge is actually we have the responsibility of not allowing that to disconnect from people and place. And so the sustainability is also about that green space and the responsibility we have for land use. So again, I think my suggestion is we need a small group on this that can really take forward some of those projects, take forward some of those sites, do the connected thinking, and bring it back to this group with a sort of action plan of what we will do in the next year.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jez. I'll come to Laura, who's got a hand up.
Yeah, a couple of points came to mind while you were talking, which we'd certainly be interested in being involved in. One is, if you've got people going into retrofit, a lot of the expense is in getting them there and set up and so on. So with rented accommodation, for example, why don't we take the opportunity to also retrofit them for accessibility while the workmen are in there? And that could then be potentially a shared cost between those who've got the money for the energy side of things and those who've got the responsibility for the housing standards. Because, you know, the livability of a house is not just about its environmental sustainability, it's also about its human sustainability. And that's not an inconsiderable aspect of that. And so again, in terms of working together to make the most of these environments, we'd be interested in working with you, bringing in what disabled people are telling us are the big issues on the climate aspects that they are experiencing, because priorities will be different according to different groups. For example, you can cope with a colder house if you're a very fit, healthy, warm running person. But if you're a relatively immobile, light, older person who feels the cold really well, then obviously that becomes a greater priority to make sure that you've got a system that can provide plenty of heat at a low cost. And yeah, we have, when anyone doing retrofit, I would just like to remind people, we have a panel of disabled people who are being trained in access auditing. And they have a range of different impairments, so they could bring their lived experience to it. And just to cover the running costs of that, anyone would be very welcome to utilise their expertise and ours.
Thank you, Laura. Point very well made. On to Katherine.
Thank you. Yeah, Jez, thank you. That was great. I wonder if the group might want to consider if there's an opportunity to also think about the skills gap and the skills and training opportunity, both kind of for new build, but also in retrofit, because the scale of the retrofit project is absolutely enormous. It dwarfs the new build challenge, really. I know Elaine, we're looking at our own housing stock, and it's forecast to be £20,000 a unit. It's absolutely budget breaking. But not only is there that challenge, the funding challenge, but the challenge of who's going to be able to do that work. There's already massive supply chain pressure on labour and materials. So that's probably an area that possibly could be explored.
Yeah, Katherine, if I can just come on back on that, I think that's really important. And of course, you know, what we're starting to talk about is how do you create a local industrial strategy around this. The Build Back Better narrative is very easy to talk about, but the complexity here is we're talking about, you know, a lot of money needing to be invested to improve existing housing stock, and that also needs training and jobs being created. So there is a really exciting opportunity here too. And I know that some of the work WECA are looking at in terms of the future skills agenda and Dan Norris is excited about is also, I think, in that space. So if we can start to bring together that narrative, I think there's a way of tapping into some of that funding. And, you know, there's conversations I know happening with Vista about some of that future skills agenda as well. So I absolutely agree with you. I think we need to be thinking about a local industrial strategy which supports Build Back Better in this space. And that is about, you know, driving that green agenda right through the core of this. So let's make sure that we're not missing the skills agenda. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jez. And I think sort of you suggested about a working group then reports back. I think at the future meeting, the board would be really good. And again, you know, do sort of like along to that. If anyone else would like to part of it, could you pop your names in the chat and we'll collate the names. So I've just had a note to me in the chat there, Alex. I'm going to come to you just to talk a bit about Goal 2 and the Race and Housing Conference. I know you've got to go at 10 to. Let's sort of give you a few minutes to be able to talk to that.
Hi, yeah, I was a bit disappointed the goal just got moved over because we were meant to be jointly, we were told to stay back for this as well today. I think it's obviously a really, really important goal as well. I'm sure you'll all agree. So hopefully can be given lots of time and attention in the next meeting. I also raised, I just think it's really important to look at representation of this board from an ethnicity point of view. If you look at the percentage of our population, in particular social housing for Black minority, I think we really need to sort that for this board. Otherwise, there's a lot of voices and views missing from around the table. So I just will say that. On the Race and Housing Conference, so SARI was actually, we led this conference with the council, and it was originally going to be a much smaller thing. My idea was to have quite a small round the table conference, such as one we did some years ago, which was going to be all about focused on hate crime. It's going to be multi-agency with people with lived experience in a conference style, looking at how we could better meet the needs of victims of racial harassment and hate crime in social housing in Bristol. But then Bristol wanted us to go ahead with this much bigger idea, which was the conference that we held on the 18th of November. The main objectives, if I just say what they were to you, obviously we can look at this in more detail at the next meeting because it does need quite a lot of time. But the main objectives were to examine race equality in all service areas of housing business for staff, tenants, housing development and design. They were to ensure common understanding of the most up-to-date learning and recommendations that have come out for Kamal Ahmed Ali and Bijan Ibrahimi murders, and then other key local and national race and housing findings. It was to agree where we are now with regards to dealing with race hate in social housing and where we need to go next. It was to agree and promote unilateral best practice race and housing and hate crime policy and procedures by examining what's working and what's not working with current practice. I can send this all to you as well, by the way. It's to ensure that tenants and residents' perceptions and ideas are woven throughout. It's the voice of people who are our tenants and residents. It was to promote, and finally, so it's to promote cultural intelligence, empathy, and a focus on customer experience. So tenants and communities have the best outcomes when they face race hate. This is because we wanted to do this because there has been no focus around race and housing for a long, long time. As far as I know, if any of you can tell me any different. And in fact, when we went to look at what was going on nationally, there's been very little nationally, even in governance, to get housing providers to look at race and race equality and race and housing as they used to be years ago, back when we had the Housing Corporation, for those of you who can remember back to then. There used to be like focused requirements as part of inspections of housing around race and around equalities, and it all changed as the governance framework changed. So that was why we did it. We had, I don't know how many of you made it, but if you look at the programme, you can see we managed to get a lot of really great speakers to try, both locally and nationally, to try and share best practice ideas. And then I spoke on, we had a multi-agency section. I shared Bijan's and Kamal's stories from their family's point of view and the learning around those cases from a housing and also supported housing point of view. And we had a multi-agency session from the agencies that were involved in, particularly in the learning around those cases, which was the police and Bristol City Council, including adult social care. So it was a really, it's a critically important conference, in that it's the first time that this conversation's been had for a very long time. And it broke out into workshops where people agreed key learning and actions that we then put into a report, which is almost, because of the elections, it got delayed, the sign off to that report. But Dee's aware of this as well. Sorry, Dee, I thought you'd actually left. If I hadn't thought you'd left, I've now seen you in the corner, because Dee can add to what I've got to say, because she was a mammoth part in making this happen as well. So in fact, I'll hand over to Dee to just say a few more words, and then that probably gives us enough ready for, obviously, when we come back together on this matter. But I would like to be a big part of it, because we obviously were, we were like the lead agency that was asked to support the council on doing this. But back to you, Dee.
Hi everybody. I just really will echo what Alex has obviously briefed you all on. It was one of those kind of times where we had an idea and a small conference kind of blossomed into a large conference, and it was really well attended. We had over 180 participants, and it was very much an interactive conference as well too, and very, very good core and relevant speakers. There was a lot of outcomes and proposals that came from the conference, and ones that could obviously be considered from a city perspective for the future. But obviously, you know, we have to make sure that the report goes through the correct governance and is signed off, which, you know, hopefully that's obviously on its journey now. And obviously our more senior officers will be looking at those proposals. What I will say, what was quite key within the conference was the need for to have a very clear race and hate crime policy that is quite consistent across the city, especially from a social housing sector. And you know, very relevant that we're all obviously all working in the same direction. But what I will say is the core theme that was decided from the board was very much relevant to the Race and Housing Conference. There's an awful lot of work in there that will need to go on from the end of 2021 into, you know, the years to come as well too. So what I will say is, yes, I think it's probably better for us to have probably a more detailed conversation, and we can bring that back alongside Alex and Sado to the next meeting.
Thanks, Dee. And just the main breakouts we looked at, which is where so all the action plans came out of these 4 key areas. So we looked at tackling race, hate crime in social housing, achieving representation in housing development and management, which is why I bring that back to yourselves. Because if you look around the room, you know, if we don't do that here, then do you know what I mean? We're not going to get it further down. We looked at housing policy for achieving cohesive and inclusive communities. And we looked at residents' voice, Black and minority ethnic residents' voice as well. And then ultimately, we looked at meeting the needs and aspirations of Black and minority ethnic residents in housing and agreeing Bristol's race and housing development plan for building successful, multicultural, inclusive, diverse neighbourhoods. But all the programmes available, I can send that to you all just so you can see. And I think the report's not signed off, is it, Dee? So we probably can't send that out until it's pretty much nearly there, but then it can come out to all of you. Because
yeah, I'm sure it will be picked up now. Obviously, now we're into, you know, through the election period, and now into a new administration.
I know Laura's point around both the murder victims had disabilities as well. So intersectionality was looked at massively in the conference. What I would say is that compounded their situations massively, Laura, and it made them, you know, really increased the complexity of their situation. But the main attacks they were talking to Sari about back in the day was the racial attacks, but that compounded their situation and put them in an even more difficult position as well.
True, but they wouldn't necessarily have been attacked if they weren't if they were fit and healthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so I don't think you can say it's just one aspect.
I'm just going by what the families have told me, that's all. And I know you're right, you are right, but that's just the thing that really they kept talking about was the racist abuse. But you're right, would they have been attacked had they not had those additional needs? So,
yeah, that is very key with regards to vulnerability, Laura, on that side. What I will say is obviously it's going to be a further working group. So if you haven't already put your name forward in the chat room, please do so.
Yeah, and it will make this the main agenda item at the next meeting of the Homes Board. So as soon as the reports sort of been gone through the final stage of the governance, we'll get that circulated. And I think I have a message about this in the chat today, just a plea about if we can get their presentations and papers to us so they can go out in advance so people have time to read them on a point about accessibility. Let's just make sure we can do that as well. Brilliant. Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. So that will come to the next meeting of the board. We'll actually spend a good chunk of time on that. We will also be looking at sort of this board and its representation and its membership as well, Alex, to your other point as well. So I'll be picking that up and probably want to have a conversation with you about that separately, if that's okay. Right, so the next item I've got is future items for the September meeting. I think we've just agreed what the main one is. So was there anything else that wanted to come up? I think an update as per Paul's report on homelessness and rough sleeping. And I guess if we're setting up working groups for each of the work streams, updates from those working groups would be sort of, and that sounds like enough, but is there anything burning that anyone else is really keen that we bring to the next meeting of the board? Okay, I'll go, actually Anne's popping, I'll go to Steve first and then Laura.
Okay, thanks, Tom. We're keen to build a long-term strategy around community-led housing. This is something I discussed with Marvin. He suggested it goes through this group, and clearly it intersects with so many of the other kind of issues that we've talked about, particularly the last issue around, well, about all of them essentially, but yeah, particularly around race and inequality, and designing and having communities being able to design housing that works for their specific needs and their individual needs as residents, but the wider community needs as well. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying we'd like to put community-led housing on the agenda, please.
Cool. Thank you. And then Laura?
Yeah, as you would probably expect, I would like us to put disability in housing on the agenda. It's something that has been raised for all the time I've been on the board, but hasn't really been addressed. And given the unique opportunity of the house building scheme to address some of the issues around it, I think it would be very timely, especially given the fact that, things are going to be expensive, and there are none better than disabled people to be able to advise you on cheap ways to retrofit or cheap ways to design in features that make new houses cheap to retrofit later on as well.
Okay, thank you, Laura. I mean, what myself and Nina will do is we'll go away and sort of look at these requests. And if anyone else has got any other requests that you think of when you get off the call, there's always that one thing you thought you'd wish you'd said, right? Then drop us an email into the Democratic Services team, and we'll look at that. One thing I'm quite keen to do, and other boards I've been involved in before, is have just like a work plan that just sets out what we're going to cover at each meeting. So we've got a bit of a forward plan for the next 12 months to, this is what's coming to the next board, is that still the right priority? And that we can just prioritise accordingly. So we're making sure we're making best use of everyone's limited time. Una?
Yeah, and I was going to say, Tom, this is my first meeting, so I'm sort of taking it all in, but I think it's really important that we don't try to do all things for all people, but actually we can only focus on what we can achieve. And it is about us bringing what skills we can offer to the common good, not expecting us to be able to do everything. So I think, Tom, somewhere in there, we've got to look at the numbers as well. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, all of the things that people are talking about require investment, require new building, require, lots of sort of resources. And I think understanding that it's not just about one issue or this, it's about the whole collective nature of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gavin made a point, didn't you? Gavin's still there, about the representation. I think we need to think about that as well, because we as well as not, it's quite a lot of not-for-profits and organisations, and Matt made that point too. So this is about getting things done. It should be about getting things done, not about whose organisation is represented. It's about getting things done and who needs to be there, who can get things done.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll take that away and have a think about that. Obviously, it's myself and Una's first meeting, and I started this job yesterday, so there's a lot I'm absorbing, and many of you I'm hoping to meet with individually to kind of understand sort of some of the wider work you're involved with and some of your wide priorities. So do get in touch with me, or I'll be in touch with you in the very near future as well. The last thing I've got on the agenda that I'm looking at is dates for future meetings. It's got Oliver's name against it for that one.
Hi there. I'm not sure we have an exact one. I think there are some suggestions, but I need to work that through. So what I'll do is just get those dates and then circulate them to the board, and then we'll see whether those are okay by email. Apologies, I wasn't able to set certain ones before the date.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much. Okay, well, we've reached the end of the agenda, and we've got a couple of minutes left. I think some of you from St Mungo's, were you hoping to talk a bit about the Kerslake Commission today? Did I make that up from earlier?
No, that you're quite right. I mean, is it worth us just giving some really quick headlines and make some aware that the meeting's obviously just about to end, and unfortunately I also need to go, but maybe there's a way that people can then feed back in. Yeah. So just in terms of what the Kerslake Commission is, for those of you who don't know, it's an independent commission chaired by Lord Kerslake, hence the name. And the idea of the commission is that it's to examine learnings from the emergency response to rough sleeping during the pandemic. So the overall aim of this is to learn, embed and improve the positives from everyone in. So we've been collecting like a huge amount of information through kind of surveys and focus groups, and we're asking 4 key questions, which are essentially around joint working, what worked well, why did it work well, what didn't work well and why, what are the kind of challenges and opportunities in terms of the next phase of everyone in as people kind of move out of the emergency response phase, and what needs to be put in place to embed the good work that was developed during the pandemic. I wonder, in terms of kind of time and aware that obviously a lot of people have dropped off already, is it worth us perhaps circulating some between me and my colleague Liz, who's also here for this, to maybe circulate by email the key questions and ask people to feedback kind of directly to me and Liz to then kind of collate the response and feedback into the commission?
Yeah, I think that'd be great if you can send it. I attended the meeting I think a couple of weeks ago at the round table. So yeah, I think that'd be really helpful.
Great.
And then if you can just let us know when you need responses back by as well.
Yeah, so I'll liaise with Liz and we can make sure that we kind of set a reasonable but probably soonish deadline is probably where we'll be aiming at, and send something around for everyone to respond to.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen, and thank you everyone for bearing with us today. And thank you for your fantastic contributions. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.